Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a long-time Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at the first 5 stories in the Poirot Investigates short story collection. The Adventures of the Western Star, The Tragedy of Marsdon Manor, The Adventure of the Cheap Flat, The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge, and The $1 Million Bond Robbery.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts,
Gillian Porter, a long-time Agatha Christie reader and collector,
and her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books has decided he should really read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time.
In this episode, we will be looking at the first 5 stories in the Poirot Investigates short story collection published in the UK in 1924. All of the short stories were published in 1923. In the UK, they were published in The Sketch and in the Blue Book magazine in the US, where there was an uncredited illustration for each story. The short story collection of Poirot Investigates we have in our library is the US version that was first published in 1925 and features 3 additional stories that weren't published in the UK until 1974. Gosh, there's almost 50 years between them. I wonder why they weren't published in the UK.
I don't know. Maybe that's something to follow up in a future Q&A episode.
Yeah, maybe. We will be using the US edition as the basis for our discussions. As the US edition includes a total of 14 stories, we will split the discussion over 3 episodes. In this episode, as previously noted, we will cover the first 5 stories in the collection.
At this point in the podcast, we would normally talk about what was going on in the world and with Agatha during the year of publication. However, as this is the second book published in the UK in 1924, we've already covered those in the last episode that covered The Man in the Brown Suit. On this podcast, we will be talking about plots and stories that range from 50 to just over 100 years old, and in several cases have been adapted for TV and or movies. But as this podcast demonstrates, people are coming new to the works of Agatha Christie at any time and may not be familiar with the details of the stories under discussion. So consider this as spoiler warning, that we will be diving into plot and character details as well as talking about whodunit and why. So if you aren't familiar with the stories under discussion, you might want to pause the podcast here, find a copy of the book, read the first 5 stories before returning to the discussion. Or you can just keep listening whether you know the stories or not. It's your choice. As we'll be covering multiple stories this time around, we've changed the format a little and we'll be tackling each story in turn as follows. The title of the story, a brief synopsis, and then discussion of the story and any adaptations we found. And with that said, let's dive into the first selection from Poirot Investigates.
The Adventure of the Western Star. An actress asks Poirot for his help when she receives threatening letters about the diamond her husband gave her as a wedding gift.
So I'm going to kick things off on this one. The first word that popped into my mind, that this was a cute story. I don't know if cute's the right word, but that's what popped into my mind. I love the fact that Poirot played along with Hastings, believing that Poirot was making mistake after mistake and everything was going wrong. While as a reader, you felt confident that Poirot had everything already figured out, even if you didn't. The opening scene of them comparing their interpretations of what they saw out of the window was a very Watson-Holmes moment for me. I loved it. It was a great way to contrast the way that the two of them see the world. The mention of Mary Cavendish being a reference to Poirot's first case at Styles was a fun Easter egg. And as a Christie novice, it felt good to pick up on that. If there was a downside to this story, it was really the racial stereotyping and the way the Chinese were referenced and blamed for things they hadn't done, which was a bit uncomfortable to read from today's perspective. But overall, it was a good fun tale with which to open the collection. This was more of the Poirot I sort of got to know of the TV and movies than the Poirot from the first two novels, which, as this was written around the same time, just made me think, was Agatha Christie more comfortable sort of experimenting and playing around and developing a character in this short form, magazine short story type format than she was having to deal with a larger stage of a full novel? So I just sort of thought that crossed my mind. I did like the way that once you know the story, there's even a clue in the story title by the fact that the non-existent diamond, the Western Star, is in quotation marks in the book. I thought that was a neat and clever little thing to do. So I'm going to watch for that in future titles, and if I see anything in a quotation mark, then I'm going to know it's a bit of a red herring. One thing I did want to touch on, I think there was a few writing errors. The one that stuck out to me was when Poirot was told something was Friday next, and he said, well, that's only 3 days away. For me, Friday next means the Friday of the next week, which is going to be at least 7 days away. So that just sort of stuck out to me. And then there was an area where I think it starts off with another character reading something, and then immediately afterwards, Hastings says, I did so-and-so, and it seems like there's a switch in who the narrator is. So just made me think, as these were probably done for magazines, maybe they weren't going through her normal literary editor. They were edited by the magazine staff who didn't pick up on stuff like that. But overall, yeah, I enjoyed this, and I thought it was a great way to open the collection.
Yeah, I agree with you. I enjoyed the story as well, but the writing errors kind of leapt off the page, and I felt the same way as you about them. So those kind of jarred, especially short story. But as you said, maybe it was a different editor. Maybe they weren't really edited at all because they were going in a magazine. I don't know. But they were odd, for sure. I will say I took a different view of that first part. I felt like I suppose it was the same, really, actually thinking about it, because the way Poirot corrects Hastings on absolutely everything Hastings assumes from his view from the window, to me, really showed just how different they are and how frustrated Hastings gets from Poirot's superior attitude. And that sometimes makes me wonder how they've been friends and colleagues for so long, and how Hastings bothers to continue to work with him if he gets that frustrated with him. That side of it fascinates me, because Poirot can't be an easy man to work and live with. Again, like you, I love the nod that Lady Yardley did, that she was friends with Mary Cavendish. That's where she got the recommendation to go and see Poirot. So I like that too. The reference to the Chinese was very offensive, but of its time, I guess. I don't know if that's how they were thought of. But it was a nice story, had enough action for Poirot to do his thing, and overall I liked it.
Great. So let's move on to the adaptations. We got a lot to cover in this episode, so we'll probably be moving relatively quickly. This story was adapted for the TV series Agatha Christie's Poirot, which is the one starring David Suchet as Poirot and Hugh Fraser as Hastings. And this particular one was adapted in season 2, episode 10. So thoughts on this Poirot adaptation, Jill?
Well, first, I do want to say there seems to be no sense as to what was adapted when, because these stories are all over the place between season 2 and 3. I'd love to know the reasoning of how they decided to adapt each one when they did, because it makes no sense to me. But I much preferred the interactions between Poirot and Hastings in this, made it much more understandable to me why they stayed friends and colleagues, made it very enjoyable to watch, and the interplay between them, and the eyebrow expressions between the two of them really made it. They're both very good at eyebrow work. Miss Lamont and Jap aren't in the book, but at this point of the series, they would have been really missed because they round off. They're a great quartet, and I think they do a great job of entertaining us in these episodes. I think the adaptation flowed well, told the main story. The added parts didn't really detract from the source material. I found it very enjoyable. I would love to know if there were really that many taxis in London at the time, as Hastings only seemed to be the person that had bad luck calling one. Every time somebody put a hand up and said taxi, one appeared. And I don't know if that's what it's like in London at the time. If anybody knows, I'd love to know. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, I enjoyed this one too. I actually, as much as I liked the short story in the book, I actually preferred this to that source material. I think it took the bones of a short story and extended it into a fun character piece that really focused, as you said, on the relationship between Poirot and Hastings and made it a lot more understandable. I love the addition of the subplot featuring Inspector Jap. that when it opened, the first few shots of this story, I'm like, oh, where's this going? Because this doesn't seem to relate to the book at all, but it did. I thought it made sense, and it gave the story some more depth. And I liked the inconclusive payoff for Japp at the end, that he knew who the bad guy was, but actually couldn't prove anything. Didn't have any evidence, which I thought was fun and a little different than usual. They made small changes to the location and the dialogue, and some of the plot details were tightened up, and they solved some, albeit minor, issues I had with the original short story as well. So good on that. I want to get a bit sort of geeky here. I'd done some research on Imperial Airways for my new book on the giant Brabazon airliner. So I smiled when I saw the Imperial Airways name being used at the airport at the end. However, my first reaction was that the plane they showed at the airport was way too modern in design if the story was set in the 1920s, which is when, obviously, the book came out. And to me, it looked like a plane called the Avro 652 that Imperial Airways only used in the sort of between the mid to late 1930s. So it made me wonder, when were the David Suchet stories set? Or were they set at a specific time? Or are they meant to be the same time the book came out? Or was it just sort of a nebulous between the wars period? So I did a quick bit of research, and they apparently, irrespective of when the story is originally published, they're all designed to look as if they take place around 1936, which is interesting. It means Poirot had a very, very, very busy year in 1936.
Didn't he? Right.
But they're all meant to have that 1936 sort of mid-30s aesthetic to them, which was interesting to find out. So maybe I won't get quite so geeky about some of the historical details going forward, but knowing me, I probably will. One interesting thing we did find when we were doing the research for this was there was actually a stage adaptation of The Adventure of the Western Star, adapted by Stuart Landon into what's described as a Mel Brooks-esque comedic play titled Poirot Investigates, that was performed at Open Stage, a regional theatre in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The show actually premiered virtually on the 6th of November 2020 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic online, and then there were subsequent productions in person in April 2021 and May 2023. The virtual production can actually be found on YouTube, and we found a copy, and I will put the link for the YouTube of this stage play in the show notes.
Already done.
Okay, see, Jill's ahead of me. So the link is in the show notes. Clever Cloaks, Jill, what did you think of this interesting play adaptation?
I thought it was really cleverly done, with just 4 actors, a minimal set that stayed the same throughout. They managed to tell the story and include snippets of Poirot lore with a deal of humor without leaning too far towards farce. They were consistent throughout, I thought. That made me laugh, made us both laugh. So that was rather nice. Although some purists might not enjoy the humor and the presentation of the characters, but I tell you, if you go in expecting something that's respectful of the source material, but adapts it cleverly and explains like Poirot's background and stuff in a very clever way. And that bit they did when they were pretending to sit in the car was very clever. I thought it was done with reverence for the source material, as I said, and I would love to see more plays done by them if they have any more online.
I thought it was a highly enjoyable romp. It was a very fun, tongue-in-cheek adaptation that, as you said, really exhibited respect for the source material by a cast who's clearly having a heck of a lot of fun doing it. And so did I watching it. It was very cleverly staged, as you said, with a minimal set that never changed. Just 4 actors, 2 of them basically playing one role each, and then the other 2 playing multiple roles. And lots of breaking the fourth wall to engage with the audience, to explain things or just have a joke when things clearly went slightly wrong, and they played up to it, which I thought was great. I thought the way they addressed the racial stereotyping of the original book, the change they made was so cleverly done and easily done. It made me, why didn't Christie adopt something like that rather than going the racial route? Because it made a lot more sense in terms of the actual story, the way they did it, than it did in the original short story. So I thought that was really clever. As you said, some fun shout-outs to some of Christie's other works, which I think I got most of them, if not, probably not all of them. And it was a delightful find, well worth a watch, if you don't mind some humour with your Poirot. Highly recommend it. It's a good fun, what was it, an hour and 20 minutes?
Yeah, something about that. And I agree with you. I thought that whole thing with the black hat and the red scarf or whatever it was that they wore instead of using a Chinaman, I thought that was just very clever. And why the adaptation for Agatha Christie's Poirot didn't think of something like that as well. I thought that was a bit of a shame.
Guess we'd move on to story number 2.
I guess we shall. Are we ready? The Tragedy at Marsdon Manor. An insurance broker asks Poirot to investigate the death of a client who recently insured his life for £50,000, which in today's money would be about £1 million. So it's a lot of money. And I knew going in I wasn't going to like this one, as it's definitely not a favourite of mine. I'm not much into the supernaturally side of some of what she writes, and that's fine. Everybody has their things they like and dislike. It's just not a favourite of mine, but at the same time, at least it's very short. I did like the fact that Poirot was acting for a friend who worked for the insurance company, as that made him a little bit more official than the usual way. And I also enjoyed the way how differently Poirot and Hastings noticed things when they were doing their investigations. It talks about Poirot running, which, having, spent so much time watching the Agatha Christie's Poirot adaptations, I just can't imagine. But hey, if he runs, he runs. It's fairly obvious from the beginning that it's murder. Otherwise, why would the Queen of Crime bother writing a story about it? What did you think, Alan?
I'm with you. I mean, it's supposedly a suicide, but if you're going to send Poirot to investigate a suicide, you know it's going to turn out to be a murder. Reading the story, there was very clearly only one person who benefited from the death, so you know who the murderer is and why, which only really left the how, and that was telegraphed pretty early on as well, so that was pretty obvious. So as a result, there was really no suspension or tension in this short story, and it is short. It was just 13 pages long. And the parlor tricks, as you said, the sort of paranormal aspect of it, the parlor tricks used to get the murderer to confess, I didn't think were worthy of Poirot at all. So it was a definite for me. I didn't think it was up to Christie's usual standards so far. But as Jill mentioned, this one was also adapted for the Agatha Christie Poirot series. This is one of the ones that suddenly jumps into season 3. And this is episode 6 of season 3 of the David Suchet series. As we said, this was a very short story, just 13 pages, so the TV team didn't have a lot to work with here, and I felt they overplayed the supernatural angle. There was even more in this adaptation than it was in the original story. And the central storyline didn't really capture my attention at all, but I did like some of the additional stuff that they added that wasn't in the short story. I loved the idea of the fact that Poirot was lured to the village by a letter from the local innkeeper about a mystery, and that mystery turned out to be the fact that this guy was a mystery novelist and couldn't solve his own book that he'd written and wanted Poirot to do it. I loved the fact that they threw in that thing about the fact that he wrote under a woman's name because they sell better. I thought that was a fun touch. We talked about the sort of the eyebrow moments between Hastings and Poirot and Japp in the early one. Same here, particularly when they were having dinner and having a conversation in the pub in the evening, and just the interchange between Poirot, Hastings and Japp were fun. And I loved it at the end where Hastings and Japp pretended not to notice Poirot was standing next to his own likeness in the village's waxworks museum. Though why a village had a waxworks museum, I don't know, with a figure of Poirot in it. But it didn't really matter because it was really just a setup for the joke at the end, which I thought was wonderful and made me laugh out loud.
I really like that bit too. That's just classic of the series and classic of the relationship they developed between the characters. I loved that. Absolutely loved that bit. But like you, I felt like the adaptation was better than the story. But I think it's mainly the humor, to be honest. Like you talked about, the idea of calling Poirot to a small market town to solve a murder, and it turns out to be in a book, is genius. The way David Suchet as Poirot showed his displeasure at this was brilliant. It was funny without overplaying it. I also love the fact that Poirot avoided reading the book for as long as possible. And then when he finally does read it because he can't sleep, he's obsessed with trying to work out who the murderer would be. I thought that was very funny and very clever. The basic story was fine. I mean, it was in the background. I think the actress did a good job with what she was given because there wasn't really much there she needed to do. I enjoyed the fact that Poirot had the author/innkeeper play a part in that supernatural bit. But like you, I didn't particularly care for that bit at the end. And I thought the Miss Rawlinson as the secretary come housekeeper was rather underused. And I was a bit puzzled why she was actually added to the script, unless it was to give you a possibility of somebody else that might have done the deed. I don't know. I also want to say, I do love how Hugh Fraser as Hastings goes, I say. It just seems so natural each time. And it just is so much part of Hastings' character. Just makes me smile every time he says it.
I love the way he actually uses that little phrase to convey so many different meanings. As the more of these you watch, you realize that it is, I say, conveys a multitude of reactions and feelings and emotions with just those two words based on the way he delivers it. Yeah.
I know it is. It's very clever. He is very clever doing it. So shall we move on to the next one? The Adventure of the Cheap Flat. Hastings recounts to Poirot the story of people he met at a party finding a really cheap flat on the edge of Knightsbridge, which is a very affluent area in London, for obviously very little money. Poirot is intrigued and investigates. What did you think of this one, Alan?
I thought the central premise of subletting your apartment to somebody with the same name that looks similar to you, so you can sort of disappear without being noticed, was a clever idea. But in practical terms, I think it's highly implausible. I mean, what are the statistical odds of that actually happening, even if there's a lot of people in the phone book with the same name, which was Poirot's reason for pointing out that it was practical? I don't think it's practical at all. I don't understand. Building your hopes around the fact that you're going to find somebody like that within a short period of time so you can disappear quickly. I mean, it could probably take months, if not years, to find somebody with the same name as you that looks like you to sublet your apartment. So, yeah, it just seemed totally impractical to me. And I didn't understand how Poirot figured out the location of the person who sublet the apartment, who was a spy, and then moved on to a different location. I didn't figure out how Poirot knew where the spy was at the end of the book. It seems to be a big plot hole for me. To me, this read like it was two separate story ideas. The sort of the idea of the apartment switch is like Agatha Christie had this idea. I'm like, oh, that would be a cool thing to do. And then the idea, the spy story, which again read a bit like one of the Holmes stories, the stealing of naval plans and things like that, and sort of mushed the two together for this magazine short story. It didn't flow. I know it was only a short story, but even so, it just didn't flow well for me. It felt very disjointed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was also highly implausible. And it wasn't a mystery with all the clues that anyone can solve if you're careful enough to read it. There is no chance anyone was going to solve this except Poirot, because he magically pulled where she was staying out of a hat at the end of the book. You didn't see how that happened or anything. So that, to me, I found that little bit annoying. I can assume that the idea came from the fact that Agatha Christie liked acquiring places to live. Over the years, she bought houses as and when, seemed to enjoy the whole process of finding somewhere. So I could see the idea and where that would come from would appeal to her. But putting into a spy story like this was a bit of a stretch for me. But at the same time, it was still, to me, an enjoyable read. They don't have to be plausible for me to enjoy them. At the same time, a puzzle as to why Poirot was actually as interested as he was to actually investigate, rather than, that's a weird story, and moving on like most of us would.
Just thinking back to some of the earlier episodes where you talked about Archie coming back from the war, how difficult it was to find a place to live earlier on, and then them finding an apartment and somewhere to live. It just makes me wonder if maybe they had been at parties where somebody had done that. Hell, I just found a place and it was really cheaper than I was expecting. She'd heard that sort of snippet of conversation at parties that they'd been to, allied with their own struggles of trying to find a place over the intervening years, post-war years. Just now, as you were talking, it just popped into my mind. I could sort of almost imagine them being at a party and somebody saying that, I just found a great place really cheap, and Agatha Christie getting a notebook out and writing it down.
Yeah.
So... yeah.
I could see that because she always had her notebook with her. So, yeah, I get where you're coming from on that one.
Which leads us again into the adaptations. We're back in season 2 for Agatha Christie's Poirot with David Suchet, and this time it's season 2, episode 8 for The Adventure of the Cheap Flat. Jill, what did you think of this one?
There was a lot I liked about this one, but it wasn't one of my favorites, I would say. I did like the change of Poirot meeting the Robinsons at the party with Hastings, as I could see why that would make him more interesting for him, because they were a rather ordinary couple. They were a nice couple, but there was nothing special about them. But still puzzled as to why this snippet of conversation would make him go out of his way to investigate. And he spent what in the novel was 10 guineas a week to rent a flat in the building so he could see what was going on. That also seemed a bit puzzling to me, because even if he is earning money, there's still a lot of money for something when there might not be anything going on anyway. And I also didn't get through the whole of the investigation into what was going on, why nobody thought to try and keep the Robinsons safe. They were just let to go around their life in a, regular manner without any idea that there might be a reason why they've been let this flat. The FBI agent was just awful, and all the American football terms he used to explain his plan annoyed me. I hate that. I hate when people use sports terms to explain things in any situation. And I just felt like here, well, we both hate it. I know you hate it too. Here it was worse. How are the British police going to have any idea of the rules and what game he was talking about anyway? And how would they know how to do their job? That was the thing for me. At the end of the day, how would any of them, even Jap, know what they were meant to be doing? That just puzzled me. I loved Pauline Moran as Miss Lamont. That's the only way I ever think of her. And the interactions between the four main characters just remains my favorite part. The spy story I felt was improved in the adaptation, but it was still a bit odd, that whole thing of waiting for someone to have the same last name and look like Carla Romero, the spy. Why hadn't the assassin struck before then? Why did he wait until after the new Robinsons were in there? They'd lived there for 6 months. If you find out where they are, why wouldn't you just go in and do it? Poirot knowing how to fix a lock seemed a bit out there too. All those stairs for the trash. Poor person who had to go up and collect all the trash on whatever day it was, I can't remember. That just, seemed a bit crazy to me. Then I was online checking for information to see if the terrible song sung by Carla Romero in the nightclub was actually a real song. But I didn't seem to be able to find much about that. But I did come across a page of Goofs, they were called, made in the series. I love this one. When Miss Lamont goes to interview Carla Romero at the nightclub, the manager tells her it's the second door on the left. But when she goes down the corridor, it's actually the second door on the right. I love stuff like that. It kind of brings it a bit more that not everybody's perfect and these things happen. What did you think, Alan?
It was a mediocre adaptation for me, sort of middle of the road. I did like some of the changes they made that did make sense. I liked Carla Romero / Robinson, the spy, working as a nightclub singer. I liked the fact that they had the finale sort of in the club. It made more sense than just a random house somewhere. I liked seeing Miss Lamont get to do some undercover field work. Miss Lemon, I thought that was fun. Like you, hated the stereotypical loud, brash American FBI agent who talks in sports metaphors. Like you said, it's something we both really dislike. And I thought just having him be a typical, that stereotypical loud, brash American just rubbed me the wrong way. You mentioned the assassin. Why didn't he get them earlier? And then even after he had struck, there's at one point where Poirot makes a huge assumption that the mafia assassin will wander away and not threaten them. There's two things. One, Poirot makes the assumption that the guy's going to just disappear. So the Robinsons aren't in danger anymore. The innocent Robinsons aren't in danger anymore. But he doesn't disappear. He's just still on the other side of the street. And he watches Poirot walk away, but then he still doesn't go back in and finish the job. So I was like, there was like two huge potholes there that I just didn't get. One thing I will say, I don't have it in the notes, but I really did like, was when they told the backstory of what happened in New York, and they did it like a stage set. So they didn't actually have to sort of recreate New York exactly or whatever. It was sort of an impressionist painting of New York on a stage with the actors moving in it. And I thought that was very cleverly done. I thought that was a very neat way of getting around the fact that they couldn't fly everybody to New York and do location shooting. So I thought that was very neat.
Oh, I like that. I thought that was very clever and effective too. Yes.
Yeah. I said I wasn't going to get historical geeky again, but yes, I am. One historical note that jumped out to me at the beginning, they were watching a movie called The G-Men, which was obviously sort of a lead-in for bringing in the American FBI agent and stuff. But that movie came out in 1935, which sort of fits the mid-1930s aesthetic. But then later on, a character actually mentions something around Bonnie and Clyde still running around in the US. But they were actually ambushed and killed in May 1934, the year before. So, that doesn't quite line up. I will say one of our fun discoveries of doing this research for this was, I think we've mentioned this series before, but not really dug into it. The Japanese anime series, Agatha Christie's Great Detectives, Poirot and Marple. And their second episode adapted The Adventure of the Cheap Flat as Yashui Manshon no Zado. I hope I got that right. Which translates as The Riddle of the Cheap Flat or The Riddle of the Cheap Apartment. First broadcast on 18th of July 2004. I was delighted to actually discover it's available on YouTube with English subtitles. So we sat down and watched this delightfully strange Japanese anime version of Poirot and Miss Marple and their adaptation of The Adventure of the Cheap Flat. So what did you think of it, Jill?
Wow, what can you say when Miss Marple and Poirot inhabit the same show? It's got to be good, right? I thought it was a fun, basically straightforward retelling of the short story. It makes sense for that, but what on earth was Miss Marple doing sending a 16-year-old and her duck to London with no plan where she would stay, what she was going to do? That blew my mind. So Miss Mabel West is the daughter of Miss Marple's nephew, Raymond West. She has some moxie, though, and she managed to inveigle her way into Poirot's household and help solve the mystery. She is a fun character, and by the end of the episode is part of the team being offered a room in Miss Lamont's house. I look forward to watching more of these if we can find them. I thought it was fun. Not sure what part Oliver the Duck played, but maybe he helps out in further episodes. There are some more adaptations of stories in this series that we'll cover in the next part of this Poirot Investigates extravaganza. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, it was certainly different, and I wasn't expecting the duck. Though it being an anime show, I should have really expected some sort of cute character of some sort, but the duck was fun. And the strange love story, sugary romance theme song that goes with it is just mind-blowing and not very Christie-like. Like you, I liked Mabel. At the beginning, I thought she was going to be annoying, but she wasn't. Her determination to become Poirot's assistant paid off. The actual story of the cheap flat woven into her story turned out to, I think, to actually be a more faithful adaptation than the David Suchet version. Sorry. And it solved one of the plot holes with just 2 lines of dialogue, which again was very clever. Why didn't anybody else think of doing that? And I really enjoyed seeing karate chop action Hastings. I thought that was fun. Seeing Hastings getting a bit physical there. Like you, I look forward to watching more of these. They cover a lot in a short 25-minute episode. I was very impressed with it. Real fun. Again, if you're a purist, you may not like it, but if you sort of just take it for what it is, they're fun. And I look forward to finding more of them.
Me too. I hope the others are on YouTube too. And that link will also be in the show notes.
You mean you haven't put it in yet?
No, I realized that when we came down. I was like, oh, damn, he's going to mention that one, and I haven't put it in there yet.
Falling down on the job there, Jill. Never mind.
I'm sorry.
With that, we'll move on to the next story.
The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge. Poirot is recovering from the flu, so when a friend of Hastings requests his help with the murder of his uncle at their small hunting lodge, Poirot directs Hastings to go investigate and keep him posted via letter and telegrams. Okay, I go first this time. This again is very short. I thought this was a good story. And a lot of them are enjoyable when rereading, but this one really suffers from knowing what happened. Because when you know the twist in this one, there is no tension. I like that they did their twist with Poirot being too sick to investigate and leaving it up to Hastings. And it shows that while Hastings may not be the smartest person in the world, he can pay attention, and he sent good enough notes for Poirot to work out the solution. As with any of these stories we cover, I'm always impressed how fast mail delivery was, not like it is today. And Alan, you have some more geeky theoretical talks about that, I think.
Not theoretical, actual practical.
Practical, sorry.
No, it's okay. When I wrote a Sherlock Holmes story that's actually centered around something disappearing in the mail, I did actually do a lot of research because, like you, when I used to read or watch Holmes, it was like, how did they communicate by mail so quickly that you can send somebody a question and you get an answer, within a couple of hours. So if you're talking about central London in sort of the late 18th century, early 19th century, they had as many as 10 to 12 deliveries a day. Everything went by. I mean, think about it. The mail was the internet of the day. That was the main way to communicate. They used to send all sorts of things in the mail, and it was sort of guaranteed delivery, literally within hours. And the further you got out from London, even out in the suburbs and further out, it wasn't unusual to get like 4 deliveries a day. Mail guys used to carry so much mail. Sometimes they would actually have 1 or 2 additional helpers with them with extra bags with all the mail that they had to deliver. So it was an amazing, it blew my mind when I did the research just to how efficient and quickly you could actually communicate by mail in England in the late 19th, early 20th century. Yeah, in this story, I know he's in Derbyshire and he's back to London, so maybe they're getting like 4 deliveries a day. Communication that way was just incredibly quick back then. Totally plausible.
Sheer logistics of that, though, is just mind-blowing.
Oh, it is,
Absolutely
yeah.
mind-blowing.
It's staggering, yes.
And my last comment on it was really, if you do wonder why they actually wanted Poirot involved in this in the end.
Yeah, I think that's one of the notes I had is why did they decide to call in a detective in the first place? You know, they make a point of that in the short story that he went looking for a detective and ended up with Poirot. So, you know, why go looking for a detective, especially Poirot, when if they'd just left it in the hands of the local Derbyshire police, the chances are they would have got away with it quicker. I mean, they did get away with it, but yeah, it just seems strange. Back to the story overall. I like the story. I think this is one of my favorites of the 5 so far. It was a good traditional locked room whodunit mystery. I guess pretty quickly that the bearded American who supposedly committed the murder didn't actually exist because the only person who'd actually seen them was the housemaid. Nobody else could verify that they'd even seen that person, never mind them being in the house. But I didn't figure out that the housemaid and the wife was actually the wife playing a role. You know, it was a bit like the Clark Kent Superman, Diana Prince Wonder Woman thing. You never see them in the same room at the same time. And that didn't click, which for a comic book guy is really terrible. I thought that was a neat twist. I also like the idea that the murder weapon was actually replaced and put back on the wall, and then they took another one and threw that away to make everybody think that that was the murder weapon. The missing one was the murder weapon when the actual murder weapon was still in the room. I loved that idea. I also like the idea of Hastings being the lone man on the spot as Poirot is sick in bed and still in London, and Hastings is there in Derbyshire with trying to figure things out and write his notes back to Poirot. And the fact that Poirot lay in bed in London can actually figure it all out just from Hastings' notes. I loved that. I thought it added a whole other layer to their relationship. My sort of 2 notes were, you know, why did the couple who set it up and did the murder, would they go actually looking for a detective? That didn't sort of seem to ring true. And the ending, even though everybody knew what happened, they couldn't actually figure out how to get enough evidence for a conviction. So they got away with it. And then Agatha Christie just throws this line at the end. But they died later in a plane crash, so justice was served. I thought, whoa, that's cold. Both traditional in the setup, but different in the way it was resolved. A really sort of surprising cold end, which seemed very un-Christie-like. So
I know.
Yeah,
made it all the better, though, right? Because you're not expecting it.
Yeah. So how did the adaptations of this one go? Again, with the David Suchet Poirot series, we're back in season 3. As Jill said, these things are just jumping around. This is actually the last episode of season 3, episode 11. And I thought this was a fun TV episode. I think it really worked as an hour's entertainment. But they did it by basically ignoring everything that made the short story work. They got rid of the closed room aspect. They got rid of the limited cast. Hastings wasn't man on the spot. Poirot was there as well. So it turned out to be sort of a fun Poirot episode, but it wasn't the short story. But I will say I did like, there's one shot in particular where you've got Poirot, Hastings, Japp, and one other character walking up to the house in the early morning light as the dawn breaks behind them. And it was just like a scene out of a Western. It was like the 4 guys walking down the street in Tombstone on the way to the gunfight. So that sort of made me smile. I don't know if it was deliberate. I'm pretty sure it was a little bit of a homage there by the director or the photography guy or whatever, but that made me smile. But yeah, like I said, for me, this was a fun TV episode, a good Poirot episode, but it had very little relation to the actual story. What about you?
Well, I understand changes are made as the written word and TV are very different types of entertainment, and the ways you have to tell a story, a visual story, is very different from a written story. I agree. It was enjoyable, but I think it did lose all those things that made it special. My assumption was, as it's Agatha Christie's Poirot, the writers felt that he needed to be more present rather than stuck in his bed back in London, because that's not very interesting on the TV. In the short story, there are only a few people at the small hunting lodge. I think at the time of the murder in the short story, there's murder victim, Hastings' friend's wife, and so say the housemaid. So technically, there were only 2 people in the house when the murder happens. But in the adaptation, Marsdon Manor is suddenly massive, and they have a hunt day, like a shooting day. They all go off shooting, they have dinner, whatever, and then everybody else leaves. So then it ends up with just that. But there are also staff in the house. And I'm like, how does that person being the hostess and the housekeeper, how do they manage that with 2 female staff in the house and the groundskeeper that comes in and out? How do you manage the logistics of somebody else not realizing you only ever see one of them? I know it's a TV show. I spent way too long thinking about this. But that kind of spoilt it for me, because when there's just 2 or 3 of you in the house, it can be done. But when you've got servants that are moving about the house, I just don't see how you can do that on a long term, especially when you're hosting all those people after a shoot. There was a lot of people in the house at that time. Parts of it were fun. Apart from that, that just took it into the level of, this is ridiculous for me. I thought the short story in that respect made it much more believable than the adaptation that this could happen.
Yeah, I mean, they did try and address that in the show by talking about it, but I don't know, it just didn't ring true.
You just can't leave notes, because that's what they said. Oh, the housekeeper was very particular. She left a lot of notes. And you're like, no, that's not how it works. When you're hosting a lunch like that.
To have whatever it was, 20, 30 people in that house at one point, and the hostess moving among them disguised as the housekeeper among all those people that she knew intimately. It's like, surely somebody would have noticed.
But as you said, that bit when they come over the hill, the 4 of them, and I think they have the railwayman's bike at the time as well, don't they?
Yes, they did, yeah. The 4th one was the gamekeeper, wasn't he?
The gamekeeper, yeah.
Yeah, with his shotgun, which made it even feel even more like
Tombstone. And his dog and the push bike. Yeah, that was very clever. I did like that.
Okay, on to our last story.
Right, the last story is the $1 million bond robbery. And I will say the synopsis isn't really needed, because it's pretty much explained in the title. $1 million in bonds are stolen on their way to New York.
Must have taken you ages to write that synopsis.
It did. There was just too much information. And what did you think of this one then, Alan? Cheeky.
Thank you. It set up an interesting mystery of how could a set of bank bonds disappear from a ship mid-Atlantic. So, well, that's an interesting thing. Once he got to the point in the story where Poirot interviewed the senior bank officials, I'm like, uh-oh, that's obvious. The bonds went on the ship in the first place. Midway through the story, it's like, okay, figured it out. So from that point of view, as a mystery, it sort of fizzled out partway through. But again, it was a good character piece, I thought. I liked the idea of Poirot basically being invited to eat steak and kidney pie in a pub. And I would have loved her to have expanded on that bit, because knowing how fussy he is about his food and how particular he is about his surroundings and things, I would have loved her to have sort of focused in on that a bit more and got an insight into Poirot's reaction to sort of eating, pub food. Apart from that, I also loved Hastings at one point calling out Poirot for his self-centered conceit. I thought that was really funny. And then I loved Poirot's self-aware response as well. Hastings says in the text that it made him laugh, and it made me laugh too. Yeah, I thought it was a good, fun short story. It wasn't a great mystery, but it was a fun story.
Yes.
What about you?
I would say the same. I thought it's, again, a seemingly very straightforward story, but one of the frustrating ones for me as well is it's all about what Poirot surmises, then researches, but doesn't tell anyone. You can work it out, but it's another one where Poirot does a lot of secretive stuff that obviously infuriates Hastings, like it infuriates me. And like you said, they do talk about it briefly. And Poirot does one of his greatness boasts in such a way it makes Hastings laugh and forgive him. I agree with you. That part was wonderful. It's a clever plot, though. The one thing about the book that only struck me when we were watching the adaptation is when the young woman who's a fiancée of Mr. Ridgway, who'd gone on the boat, invites him to come and talk about it with this steak and kidney pie. Her fiancé is already back. And it's only just happened. That bit, I'm like, how did he get back? How is he already back, right? Same in the adaptation. I know the ships turn around, but the ships take 4 or 5 days. But it seems much, time isn't mentioned, but I felt that made me curious. Is it really that fast that you get back, or is it really that slow that they were investigating? After that, we'll talk about the adaptation. This one is season 3, episode 3. So I told you they're all over the place. No necessarily rhyme or reason on this, but absolutely fascinating. I thought this was an enjoyable episode. I thought the additions to the story just added depth rather than being a filler to fill out the time of the episode. Poirot got in some great zingers, but my favorite was the one with the security manager at the bank. It was great writing and a brilliant delivery. I thought that was excellent. I love the twist with Hastings having the mal de mer, not Poirot as expected. Would have liked to have seen more of the Queen Mary. I liked, like you talked about, that way they merged in all the real, what's the word?
Historical footage.
Yeah, thank you. There you go. See, that's why I need you. All that historical footage in, I thought that was very clever. And I thought building it up instead of it being the other one, the Queen Mary and that, really was a good way to start the episode, with Hastings being all excited because the Queen Mary's coming, but he's not going to get to take a trip in it because Poirot won't go because he's going to suffer from seasickness. And then he suffers. I love that twist. Not too sure about Miss Lamont now becoming the keeper of Poirot's wardrobe and doing his packing and unpacking. Doesn't seem like that should be part of her job, really. I don't know about that. I thought that bit was a bit odd. What do you think, Alan?
I did like the way they spliced the historical footage, both the black and white and the colour in there. To a large extent, it seemed pretty seamless. I love the fact that they actually managed to put, when they were getting on the Queen Mary, they managed to sort of put David Suchet and Hugh Fraser into the, I don't know whether they just, the way they filmed it, but it did look like fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? Authentic newsreel footage. So I don't know whether they spliced them in or they just filmed it in that way, manipulated the resulting film to look like it, but I thought that was very good. And then
it was
when the Queen Mary came back and they actually used the actual footage of it docking at Southampton and stuff, I thought was very good. So if you remember back to our episode on the murder on the Links, I was very unhappy with the adaptation done by one of my favorite authors, Anthony Horowitz, and complained about the way that adaptation was done. Well, this one was another Anthony Horowitz adaptation, and I really enjoyed this one. So he's back in my good books. This was a good adaptation. It took the basics of, again, a very condensed story. I think this was another 12, 13-page story, and spun it into an entertaining 1-hour TV episode with some great character moments. I thought all the additional cast members did their job very well, and the various diversions added a bit more depth and additional layers to the mystery. Because even though I knew who'd done it in the source material, the TV show, I kept thinking, well, maybe they've changed it and it's somebody else. It made you think there was at least two other possibilities of who it could have been. And of course, then they also introduced another character who was part of the plot who wasn't in the original thing. So even though I knew who'd done it, because I'd read it, watching this made me unsure if I knew who'd done it until the very end. And I thought that was really good. Anthony Horowitz, you're back in my good books. I really enjoyed this one. And it was a good way to round out the review of these first 5 stories.
Yeah, I agree with you. As you said, that part of making you doubt yourself is always very good when they can do that with a TV adaptation. Right, well, now we've made it almost to the end. We've made it to my favorite quote section. Agatha in 1924 had a request regarding her income tax for the earnings from her writing. Her response was, I had just happened to write 3 books, some short stories and poems. I wasn't an author. I wasn't going to write all my life. Well, we know different, don't we? But I just thought that was another interesting look into how she thought of herself. She still, even after all that time, still didn't think of herself as an author or a writer, or that it was a career. I find that fascinating.
I just happened to have written 3 books.
Yeah.
Knowing how hard it is to write a book, it's like...
I know, it makes it sound like, oh, I just woke up and there it was.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And a quick note of thanks to those folks who have already left us a rating and have subscribed. But we could do with a few reviews, folks. Thanks. If you'd like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, a link for which will be in the show notes. Or you can find us on social media. Jill, where can they find you?
They can find me at the Chronological Christie Instagram account. I'd love to hear from you all. I've enjoyed interacting with the people that have asked us some questions or made comments, and thanks for the compliments.
Yes, thank you for the compliments we've had so far. They're very humbling. I can be found on most social media platforms just by searching for @AlanJPorter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. And if you want to keep up with my various writing projects, you can sign up for my free weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books discussed on this podcast can be found on a dedicated chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will also be in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode, where we'll be discussing part 2 of the collection of short stories from Poirot Investigates. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra and is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.